Yep. Hey everyone, welcome to Case Preparation and Partner Dynamics by Robin and Lavanya. I am Rohan, also over here. Thank you so much everyone for attending. Can we move to the next slide? Uh, Yeah, three broad ground rules and one announcement. Number one, always take notes. You can't improve if you're not taking notes. If you are not retaining this information and passively watching this lecture, you are not going to benefit from it no matter how hard you try. So it's always a good idea to write whatever you're thinking. Second, always ask questions. Again, can't improve without asking questions. The whole point of this series is to have your specific questions answered so you can get targeted qualitative feedback. And if you don't ask questions, then you will not be able to apply these advice to your specific situations. Third, always fill out the feedback form. At the end of this session, I will roll out a feedback form. Please do fill it. It helps us make better sessions for you all. And if we make better sessions, you're able to learn much better. And finally, Zoom is now premium, so we don't have to shift every 35 minutes. So, woohoo, thanks, mom. But yeah, apart from that, let's get started.
Thank you, Rohan. So, okay, welcome everyone to the session that is case preparation and partner dynamics. So, before we begin with the session, quick intro about Lavanya and I. So, we were from Deen Dayal Upadhyay College, Delhi University, and we have been debating since 2021. So, we have done almost all debates together as a team. So, and we would have probably done more than 1,000 case prep sessions. Like, I don't know what the number is, but yeah, we've also teamed up with other people, not a lot, but we have. So yeah, we can tell you a lot about partner dynamics, and we have been through ups and downs in partner dynamics. Like, we have had the happiest of moments. We have fought also while doing case preps. We have wanted to kill each other during case preps, and we have also been so thankful to each other during case preps. So we have literally have had a vast majority of experiences. So we would be glad if all of you could learn something and get some good insights. So, all right, over to Lavanya now.
Okay, so we're going to start with case prep strategies first. So we really want this session to be really, really interactive because it's not a lecture. There's nothing which is hard and fast within case prep. Like it's not like five strategies. If you follow it, you're gonna win debates. It's like figuring out what works best for you. So we can share our experiences or what worked best for us. We can give you multiple different approaches to go about case prep, and then you can figure out with your teammates and find out like what is the best way for you to like go about case prep, what strategy is working for you, and also like to figure out like what strategies work in what sorts of motion and in what sorts of themes as well. So debating in general is more about, say, practice mixed with hit and trial methods to figure out what is the best synergy that you can have with your teammates in general. So that's something which is for you to figure out, but we are always there to go ahead and explain different approaches that you can take, and also give you personal experiences of what worked best for us. So firstly, moving on in terms of generic things about what do you do in a BP case prep, especially because the time is running short. You just have 15 minutes to come up with case lines and to make sure that you have to win this debate room. And the rooms can be really high stressed rooms as well, because if you are against like really good teams, or if you need a certain amount of points to be able to be break eligible, it's a bubble room, etc. So there are a couple of things that you should always have in mind while case prepping. So the first thing that I feel is burden identification. So the way that I view burden is twofold. One is the burden that motion places onto you, and the second is the burden that you take upon yourself. The motion burdens are more about being clear with the basics of debating, basics of motion framing, and different motion types. So if you get a motion, the first 1 or 2 minutes, you should be very, very clear about what needs to be proven in this debate by virtue of the way that the motion is framed. So let's just say that you have a motion of this house regrets XYZ. So you should be very, very clear in the first minute of speech, or like in a first minute of your case prep, that the three burdens that you have on yourself is to go ahead and regret this motion, give regret metrics in terms of retrospectively why is this bad, and then talk about why is it, what is the counterfactual, why is it likely, and why is it going to be comparatively better than status quo, or like the thing that you're regretting per se. So those are the burdens that the motion is placing onto you by virtue of the way that it is framed. So it can be slightly different if it's a THS motion, if it's a THPT motion, etc., etc. So those things should be very, very clear in the first 1 or 2 minutes. The next time that you go ahead and spend is thinking about different argumentation and thinking about different burdens that you're taking on yourself. And there are multiple ways to go ahead and think about arguments, because there are going to be several motions wherein it's not very intuitive to come up with stock arguments. You might think that like we are just blank how to go about it, just because you haven't practiced that sort of motion, or maybe like you have little to no knowledge about that topic. So there are three ways which we feel can generally help you in terms of coming with arguments and thinking about ideas. The first thing is creating a stakeholder chain. So whenever you think of a motion, create a stakeholder chain in your mind, like how is this motion affecting different stakeholders and how those stakeholders are being affected by it. So at that point in time, you're able to come up with like different line of argumentation in terms of how it's going to impact different parts of the society and different actors per se, and what that impact could generally look like. For example, if there's a motion about, say, education system or education at large, you can think about how is this motion affecting, one, students, because students are directly linked with education. But second, how is it affecting teachers? Because teachers can also be a part of the education motion at large. Third, there could be education system or like the country at large that is going to be affected by, say, education themed motion. And fourth, it could be maybe parents as well, because children are linked to parents, and then if you can establish that link. So um, then it just becomes much more easier for you to come up with different line of argumentation if you're able to draw a stakeholder chain in terms of what all stakeholders are affected by that motion and how is that going to affect those stakeholders. So this is the first way to think about arguments. The second way to think about arguments is like, imagine if this motion were to be true, or this argument were to be true, how is this going to affect in the real world? So it's about realism, applying those arguments in the real world. If this were to come, like if this were to come true in the real world, what sort of impact it can have on a micro level or on a macro level. So just changing the POV that you have to come up with a different line of argumentation. For example, let's just say that you think about that this motion is going to lead to increase in GDP for the country. Then you think about if the GDP of the country is increased, what kind of impact is going to happen, or like what sort of real life changes that is going to happen by virtue of that. That can look like more income for the government. That means if government has more money, they can have better policies. That means that they can allocate better funds to different policies, which is a good thing. But also that means there's more money for businesses, because that would increase businesses or create more money for investment within country. What would mean if there's much more money for business? That means that there's going to be more employment generation, because businesses have the capacity to generate employment. And if there is more employment, what would that lead to? More employment means people are making more money in general. If people make more money, then their standard of living gets better. So it's just a loop of argument or a consequence of one argument that you're able to create a series of events out of it. And you're able to think that what happens next if this were to be true. And all of this is very simple real life thing. It isn't something which requires any sort of, say, technical knowledge. It's just out there. So you just have to think certain motions, if they are out there, if they are true in real life, how is it going to affect things? And the third thing is the why loop. And I think the strategy works best, especially when you want to come up with more argument analysis. So you would have heard about a lot of judges saying that you have the argument, but that is an assertive argument. There's no analysis to prove that argument. How do you get that analysis? Because the judges are not going to buy your argument if you don't have the analysis. So you should have the premise, you should have the conclusion, but the thing that fills the sandwich is the analysis. And the way that you can come up with analysis is asking yourself why. So when you say a certain motion leads to XYZ benefit, ask yourself, why would that happen? Why is it likely to happen? Why would that lead to any sort of benefit? Why is it good? Or why is it bad? Or why is it important? So I'm just asking basic questions to myself. And you would realize you are going to get those answers. And you don't have to assume those answers. You don't have to assume that everybody would be knowing those answers because it's too obvious. You have to assume that the judge doesn't know those things. You have to give it to the judge. Like the one advice that I give to everybody is to like make sure that you are giving everything to the judge on a platter so that they don't have to use their brain too much, and it makes their life easier. So when you ask yourself these why questions, you are able to come up with analysis of that argument to fill in multiple gaps and to not make those arguments say assertive per se. So these are a few things or these are a few approaches that you can follow to come up with arguments. The third thing, and it is very, very important if you are in opening teams, is preemptions. You should always think what the other side is going to run, because you can't win just by running your case. You have to be comparative. You have to prove why your side is better than the other. You just don't have to prove that you are good. You have to prove you are better. So if you were to prove why you are better, you also have to take down any sort of potential argument that is going to come from the other side. But also, if you're OG or if you're OO, you don't know what your closing teams are going to run or the opposite bench's closing teams are going to run. So you have to preemptively make sure that you don't leave any sort of matter, or you like deal with any sort of potential argument that can come from the other side. So that's something which is known as preemption. So you have to devote, like, the second speaker can go ahead and do that comparatively better because the first speaker has to sometimes sort their speech while like case prepping, and 15 minutes too less to be able to do that. So when you are sorting your speech as a first speaker, the second speaker can simultaneously think about what can be a potential argument that can come from the other side and how to deal with that. So you preemptively deal with any sort of argument that can come from the other side, and you also think about those responses simultaneously in the case prep only. And you try, if you have time, you can push those preemptions in your first speeches so that you are dealing with those things beforehand. But if you don't, your second speaker can obviously do that. But you are also able to think about like preemptive rebuttals. Like if O is going to go ahead and talk about this, you already have enough time to think about how to respond those things. So preemptions should always take some chunk of your time while case prepping so that you can come up with better rebuttals, because those 7 minutes might not be enough for you to think of rebuttals because of the high stress room or because of the pressure that you have. The second thing is weighing. And I don't think so I can stress more on weighing than like ever, because weighing is very, very important, especially in BPs. So you would hear a lot of judges say that as closing teams, as VIPs, it's very important for you to weigh argument. Weighing is very important. You need to weigh. But I'd say that it's equally important for, say, opening teams to weigh arguments as well. Because weighing is nothing but proving the relevance of your argument. It's to answer why your argument is important. So that why that argument is important and why it should be debate winning, or why it should be placed above any sort of potential argument that can come up by any side in the future, that should be answered in your speeches, irrespective of which side you are. So even if you're OG, you have to prove in your DPM, or you have to answer in your DPM why your argument is important, why is it debate winning, why anything that can potentially come up is going to be less important than what you talk about. So these are a few key questions. If you keep in mind, you are able to come up with weighing of arguments, because weighing can be tricky to do like when you are starting debating. But even if you're able to answer these questions, I think these become implicit ways of weighing arguments, and that needs to be done on deputies, especially on opening, and VIPs, especially on closing. The fourth most thing is important clashes. And I think these important clashes can also be worked as a strategy in motions which are too spec heavy, I'd say. Because every motion, when it's set, there are always going to be certain clashes which are common to every theme or which are common to every motion. So even if you don't have spec knowledge about a particular motion, you would still be able to run certain arguments because there's common clashes or common important clashes that exist within them. So let's just say that there's a motion about rise in AI trading platforms in finance. So AI trading platforms is nothing but using AI within stock market rates. So if you think that you don't come from a finance background and you don't know how stock market works or how AI is going to function within stock market, that is absolutely fine, because there are going to be so many other things that you can just simply apply into this motion. That is to say, it is nothing but a rise debate of a tech platform. So you can simply think about, in a rise debate of a tech platform or a tech or AI, what are the most common things? The most common thing is about AI is regulation. Like if you are like supporting the rise of AI, you talk about whether it's going to be regulated or not, whether it's going to be accessible to people or not, whether there's going to be opt-in of people or not. So all of those arguments did not require me to know anything about finance. Even if I don't come from a finance background, it's absolutely fine, because these are the common clashes that are applicable in almost every debate of rise of a particular technology or rise of AI in any sort of field. So if you come up with any sort of, say, spec heavy motions, because this is something which a lot of people face a problem. If there's an IR motion, if there's a politics motion, or if there's a finance motion that you don't have any background knowledge of, you'd always be able to find some clashes which are going to be very, very obvious and common to the theme, irrespective of the spec that you have or you don't. So these are the general approaches and strategies that you can use while coming with argumentation and thinking about arguments. Now we want to funnel it down to how does the thinking process change when you are opening teams, and how does the perspective to look for arguments change when you are opening team versus when you're closing. So I'm going to cover opening teams first. So the most common strategy that you should have when you are an opening team is to try to cover majority of the argument, but also prove those arguments. Because if you say 10 different things or 10 different case lines without proving any of those things by saying one or two liners, the judge is not going to buy it. So you have to completely ground your arguments, but also make sure that those arguments are very, very obvious. So the thing that we say as stock arguments, things which are obvious in general, should always be the way to look at things while opening teams. As an opening team, you try to run the most obvious arguments, and you're going to find there are going to be multiple obvious arguments that you can run. So don't burden yourself as a first speaker, or don't think that as a first speaker you have to run everything and your second speaker just has to rebut arguments. And also there's nothing known as DLO dump as well. So that doesn't mean that DLO can't bring new arguments. You should always try to divide arguments, because sometimes the first speakers have the burden of characterization, modeling, visualization. So make sure that you divide arguments between first speaker and second speaker, and the second speaker on opening team is bringing extension. It's absolutely okay for deputies to bring out extensions of what they're like the first speakers have talked about. There's nothing known as a deputy dump. So that is the first thing. The second thing that you go ahead and think about is the most prior clash, which is the thing which comes the first in debate, like this particular motion, or what is the most obvious impact that's going to be, and what stakeholder is going to have that impact. So you think those arguments, and then you move to impacting those arguments, because you want to make sure that you're not leaving any sort of obvious loopholes for your closing to capitalize on. Because there are going to be so many times that you impact arguments, but you don't develop the premise of that argument. You prove what would happen as a consequence of this motion, but you don't prove why would this lead to this consequence. What's the bridge here? Like, if this is happening, why is this happening is something which is unknown. So closing teams can come in and say, this is why it happens, and we are more important. So you have to make sure that you bridge things well. So you prove, why is this going to happen? What would it lead to? So what would it lead to is nothing but impacts. The thing that we talked about earlier, like thinking, if this motion were to be true, or this argument were to be true, what real life impact would it lead to? What is the consequence of it is something that you think about. So you have to make sure on opening that you do two things. The first thing is proving, why do you reach this argument? How do you reach this argument? And then what is the consequence of this argument? So when you do both of these things, it becomes a complete argument. Otherwise, your closing team can either impact the argument that has been talked about in the opening, or they can work on the premise that you have. So you have to make sure that you are building the premise and you are reaching the impact from that premise on opening day. Yeah. So, yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So now I think Lavanya has explained how to approach case preps specifically when you're opening. Now I'm going to explain how to approach case preps when you are closing, right? Because the strategy uh, with respect to approaching case preps is significantly different if you're OGO or your CGCO. So let's talk about closing now. So the first thing to talk about is focus shouldn't be mechanism oriented rather than claim oriented. What does it mean? So whenever you're opening, and let's just say you're opening government, this means in the next 15 minutes, Prime Minister has to give their speech. So in the case prep, you and your partner talk about, okay, let's run argument one, argument two. But then you also suddenly have to switch to analysis within that argument. Like then you would talk about if you're going to prove that argument A, then how do we prove it? What are the reasons to prove this? Right. So then we will be giving reasons why this argument is true. So we do focus on analysis, we do focus on reasons. But when you're closing, the initial part of your case prep should not be too focused on thinking about analysis or mechanisms. Rather, it should be more focused on what the claim is, meaning what the argument is going to be. The reason I'm saying this is that if you think of an argument in 3 minutes or 5 minutes, maybe your opening can think about an argument in 15 minutes, right? Because the idea is that you have to come up with something unique. Closing teams have to come up with an extension which is distinct, i.e., unique from their opening teams. Therefore, more focus and more thought process needs to be given with respect to what can be the larger claims that I can talk about, right? So the way to do this is secondfold. If you look at the second bullet point, which says prepare a list of arguments in their order of priority, right? So, like, think about different kind of things that can occur. Now, the strategies to do this has already been explained by Lavanya. Like Lavanya talked about the stakeholder chain. Think about how different kind of stakeholders would be affected by this and would be affected by this, and then basically you can make an argument based on every kind of stakeholder, right? And maybe some arguments, two arguments can be made from the purview of the same stakeholder in and of itself. Like for example, I'll give you an example. So there's a motion which says that the stay at home trend is a trend where young people demonstrate a significantly reduced tendency to go out, which means less clubbing, less meeting up with their friends in restaurants, etc., etc. And the motion is this house supports the rise of stay at home trend. So if you're closing opposition, so you have to oppose the rise of stay at home trend. So you have to think of harms. So a lot of harms can accrue, right? So maybe create different kind of possible potential arguments that can come up. Don't think about the analysis. Think about the arguments. So maybe the first argument you can think about is maybe there's sort of an economic harm. If a lot of people won't go out and would stay at home, maybe a lot of services won't be used by them, like maybe that of metro, that of cabs, maybe that of small vendors that you go out and maybe buy food from. So maybe some sort of economic harm can accrue and people and in society. The second argument you can think about is maybe make an argument about happiness. You can make an argument about how people are less likely going to be happy if they say confined within their homes, because there is less sort of things which can actually give you meaning while you're confined, because there is a lack of newer experiences. Maybe the third argument you can think of is just talking about productivity. Like you can talk about how people's productivity is directly linked to actually going out as opposed to just staying within indoors. So you won't be productive if you're doing a business. You will be very lazy if you're doing a job, and you will be more active in a job if you're going out, etc., etc. Then maybe there can be an argument about relationships, how people's relationships, be it romantic or be it platonic, are much more better if they go out. Like if you go out with a girlfriend and as opposed to just having Zoom talks, uh, which is better if you go out with your friends as opposed to just doing a Gmeet call in the night, or maybe talking to them over the phone, which is better? So the idea is that can be so many argumentation that you can actually think about. Then sort of give priority that what do you think is the most important argument. So then give a priority, Now, this giving of priority is a little subjective. Maybe for me, the economic argument is the most important. Maybe for you, the relationship argument is the most important. So, with experience, I think you can see what in this particular motion, what argument is going to work the best, etc., etc. And after you think that you have enough amount of arguments that, and there's a good reason to believe that opening is going to miss some of them, then the best thing to go is to start making those arguments, right? And realistically speaking, sometimes when you know your opening is actually a very good team and they're probably not going to leave anything for you, then a lot of times practically what also happens is that a lot of analysis, that's you do some analysis, but you don't do the entirety of analysis in your case prep. Sometimes you have to utilize the debate time in and of itself to add on to the analysis. Like that is a reality for closing teams, and sometimes you need to do that based on your circumstances. So you also need to be prepared. Like sometimes you need to be very good with communication with respect to your teammate, that the larger analysis will focus upon this. Like for example, when you're talking about when you're talking about let's just say in this example that I gave, if you're talking about relationships, you will talk about that our larger analysis will be forced upon how relationships are much better with respect to physical proximity, and then you can nuance it like when the debate has started. Sometimes that is also something which you need to do. Okay, so yeah, I think the first 2 points are clear. Now, before I move on to the third bullet point, I'd like to talk about the fourth bullet point, which is potential missing links in the most obvious argument for a vertical extension. Now, closing teams can come up with horizontal extensions and vertical extensions. What is the difference? So, horizontal extension is something which is sort of a new argument. So, in the example that I gave before, if opening talked about economy, talked about happiness, relationships would be a horizontal extension, like something new. But sometimes you can't always come up with horizontal extensions. Sometimes you need to come up with vertical extensions. What do I mean with the vertical extension? So the meaning of a vertical extension is basically claiming the same impact as your opening, but maybe filling in some analysis or some gaps which opening team missed, or or some sort of a small burden that needs to be proven to reach that impact. I trying to identify that link and then filling up that link, right? So before I explain this, I would like to give an example because I think that is the best way to connect. So a long time ago, Lavanya and I were closing, and the motion was about that this house would break up big tech firms, right? Like to break up means to basically, if there's a very big tech firm like Google, so you basically divide them so they don't become a monopoly, and you make two or three firms out of them. So our opening ran some argument about that breaking up of big tech firms leads to them shifting and like them also transferring a lot of business to developing countries, because there's a lot of big tech firms which don't exist in developing countries at the moment. So basically, they were saying that the only way for them to shift to developing countries is when they are not broken up, right? When they're a big firm, because if you're a big firm, you have a lot of resources, so you can move to third world countries or second world countries, developing countries and underdeveloped countries. So we on closing, we saw one missing link. So the impact on opening opposition is that if you don't break up, it is a good thing because now a lot of big tech firms can go to smaller countries and can give benefit to smaller countries. We explained that we explained that opening up never proves if these big tech firms have an incentive to go to these smaller countries, because presumably it maybe does not make business sense to go to smaller countries. Maybe there is no market over there. Maybe big tech firms are more profitable if they choose to stay in their developed country and expand operation in developed countries, or maybe cross diversify in a developed country in and of itself, which means that the end impact of giving benefits to developing country is contingent on proving a link, that is there are that these companies have good enough incentives to actually move to developing countries. Because if you don't prove the incentive analysis, then the end impact of developing country getting benefited, of a lot of middle class people getting better standard of living because of technological access, can't be credited to opening opposition. So so the way we did this was in our case prep, we thought about we knew that this would be the argument that opening up will make. So we thought about small links. So maybe there's a link about capacity. Do they have the capacity? Maybe there's a link about incentive. Do they have an incentive to do so? Maybe there's a link about that what would be the scale at which they would exist. Like maybe there's also a link about doing the comparative, right? Because you also have the burden to prove that when you break up a big tech firm, they don't now they can't go to a developing country, meaning proving the converse of their side, because your argument is only true if you prove that this argument is untrue on Gov's world. If you're opposition, that is why you always need to debate in comparatives. So that is also a missing link. So there can be so ideally, like basically in all sort of cases, there are a lot of small and small missing links which are there to prove the end impact of an argument. So you think of those missing links, and whenever your opening misses a link, you think that okay, we are going to exploit this, and then we're going to like fill in that missing link, like generally. Okay, so yeah, so that is also something which you think in a case prep from closing. Like I talked about, you focus on claims and not mechanism. So similar to claims, you also focus on missing links in the most obvious argument, because you know the obvious argument is going to be made. And generally speaking, obvious arguments are also most easiest to weigh. The reason for this is that it is the most intuitive argument. Judges sort of are expecting you to make that argument. So a missing link and coming up with a vertical extension is also a very good strategy. And your case prep needs to focus on missing links. And that is a very good idea to focus ideally in the beginning part of your case prep to begin with, right? Okay, now, I would like to give another example about case prep from closing. So, as Lavanya beautifully explained about how stakeholder chain needs to be thought about from a closing team, especially. So, in Vietnam Worlds in round one, there was a motion about this house believes that educational systems should overinflate children's academic self-perception. Example, providing overwhelming positive feedback. So the idea is that in schools you should not fail students, and you should just tell students that you're great, and you should not criticize them at all. So we were opening opposition. So we ran the most obvious argument that if you never give negative feedback to students, students will never be ready for true failures in their life, and they won't be able to grow, and they won't be able to self correct themselves, right? So we explained that once you come out of school, the world is harsh, and and it would be very difficult for students to take negative feedback if they're not ready for the negative feedback. The only way to be ready for negative feedback is that once you have some exposure to negative feedback, once you have some exposure to reality, and you can only improve yourself once you know you failed an exam, or once you know that maybe you did not pay attention to your classes. So some sort of negative feedback is a good thing. So we ran a case about students. So our closing team was a very good team. So they ran an extension about teachers. So they talked about that um, we are not going to talk about students, we're going to talk about teachers. So they explained if the education system is going to ask teachers that they have to overinflate children's performance, and the teachers are always forced to give positive feedback, it's going to be a nightmare for teachers, and teachers are going to face so much difficulties to teach, and they're not going to be able to teach at all, etc., etc. And then later in their book, they were able to weigh that why this extension is more important than opening up argument about students. So the idea behind this is that the way to approach motions from closing is to think about different kind of stakeholders that are impacted, like the teachers are impacted, maybe the board of directors are also impacted in some way, the administration, the students are impacted, the parents of students are also a stakeholder in an education motion. So that is also something which you need to focus upon in a case prep session, especially by closing. Yeah, the last part is basically that latter part of prep to be utilized for matter generation. Like I've already covered this. So the initial 10 minutes, or like 8 minutes, need to focus on claims or missing links, and then focus on analysis. Because even if you have very good analysis of an argument, maybe opening runs that argument and you have to literally cut off entire pages. This is a reality. Like it has happened with almost everyone, that you have prepared 3 to 4 pages on closing, but your opening runs everything, and you literally have to literally cross all 3 4 pages, and it literally feels like a waste of time and all the efforts you've put in, and you are like, what do we do? And you are literally panicking, like we have nothing to run, our opening is done everything, and they're going to be fully derivative. So these things also happen, right? So the last advice I would want to give, this is something which we have learned like after debating a lot, is that whenever you're closing, don't go for a lot of arguments. Rather, go for one or two arguments. That is what we have learned. Because if you try to do a lot of arguments, it is very difficult to weigh something. And because judges have a bias that the obvious argument has been done by opening, so it's always best to heavily practice one or two arguments, because you need to do a lot of work to also prove that these arguments are much better than opening argument. So that is how to approach case preps from closing. Yeah. So, and that was basically the difference between opening and closing. Over to Lavanya now. Yeah, I think now we can open floor for questions specific to quiz prep sessions, because now what we're going to focus on is more on partner dynamics. So if you have any questions pertaining to how to approach case preps, be it opening, closing, or generic questions about case prep, feel free to ask right now. Yeah, Aditya.
Uh, how do you tackle or deal with bad case prep? Sometimes you don't come up with a lot of arguments, especially when you're closing. You just can't understand the motion, or even you have a bias that it's probably gut tilted or up tilted, or you have more arguments of the other side rather than you. How do you deal with that?
Okay, so I think one, debating is a lot about strategy and mindset, apart from just being, say, being able to come up with arguments, because you would see that like everybody thinks arguments on the same line. It's about how do you read the room, how do you strategize the room. So let's just say that you like those 15 minutes were total chaos. Like you couldn't come to consensus about any argument. You don't think that you have anything written or you don't have any extension by the end of case prep. So the first thing is like always keep thinking. When you see the opening debate, it's going to help you broaden your horizon and probably give you a clearer idea about what the debate looks like. And then you should try to be able to come up with some argument there, or try to find some links that are missing within that argument. So that is something which you can obviously do. So one example that I would give is like there was this motion about this house supports co-parenting norm. So co-parenting means that two people are raising the kid. They don't have to be romantically involved. They don't have to be married to each other. They're just like, they could be friends. They could be anybody. So we just interpreted the word co-parenting like very differently, and we had a very different case line. And when we saw the opening teams debate, we were like, our cases doesn't make sense. It's just like either we are doing it wrong or they are doing it wrong. But we saw like both of those teams are just moving on a like consistent angle, and we are just like we just interpreted it completely wrong. So what we did then is like we use their understanding to come up with arguments for ourselves. That's one thing. And the second thing is when they're running arguments, again, use the strategy that Robin talks about of identifying what links are being missed in that argument so that you can fill some gaps and some links. So this should be the first approach. The second approach is like absolute worst case wherein like this doesn't work. You do not have any extension. What do you do then? So, see, BPs are very, very strategic game. So it's about avoiding losing maximum points. So it's about avoiding to get a fourth, avoiding to get a third, like trying to stay in top two. So you know that you don't have an extension, you are probably not getting the first. What do you do then? You go for the next best thing, which is to get a strategic second. Make sure that you get at least 2 points and you're not getting 0 points. So the way that you can get 2 points, irrespective of not having extension, is by making sure the other teams are destroyed within this debate. So let's just say that you're CO, you do not have extension. You make sure that OG and CG's cases don't stand, and you just rebut it like heavily to make sure that there's nothing extensive matter there. So you go destructive on them. So by doing that, you're making sure that you're at least winning from the gov bench, even if you're not winning from your opening team. So that means that you can at least get 2 points, because otherwise also you were not getting 3 points anyway because you don't have a case. But now you can make sure that you have some points than having no points either. So to study the debate room and to read the debate room like that needs to be like strategically done a little bit. not to be very, very overconfident with the cases that you have, and be a little more realistic with the way that the debate is happening, and then seeing whether you are winning the debate or not. If not, how to go for getting the next best thing, which is taking a second. Robin, if you want to add anything to this.
No, I think you've covered everything. Yeah, one thing I would also say is that, like the question was asked regarding sometimes you don't know much about the how to generate arguments. So as Lavanya was talking about, it's very strategy oriented. So I've also seen debates where somebody just won on responses alone. So they just responded and they argued that that there is no need to do this motion because the status quo is good, and they just responded and just proved the other teams irrelevant. So you just need to strategically think, what can I do to actually win this, etc., etc. And yeah, and also when you if you're closing and you want to come up with arguments, see what opening is running arguments, and then try to either find missing links, and then think about arguments that are sort of related to that. Right, sometimes there are also impacting arguments. Like if somebody runs an argument about let's just say economy, then you can also impact the argument in and of itself. um, right, like you can impact it further, and impact extensions are also a thing. Then you can weigh why this material is so important that this outweighs. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. If you have uh, more, if you have any doubts, feel free to ask. So I have a few questions on the chat, so I would be taking that first, then over to you, Saksham, after that. So the first question I've received is that, very weird, but the biggest problem we run into is deciding on one motion from a sea of them. Can you tell how we can prevent wasting time on deciding a motion for case prep and actually do case prep? That is honestly a real problem. Sometimes we're in a BP mock, and it takes 30 minutes to decide which motion we have to do. So I think there are a few strategies which you can implement. The first is that you can think of a theme prior to starting the case prep, so you don't waste time. Like think, okay, today we're going to do a feminist motion. So then you can search for a motion specifically. Like there are some sites in which you can search theme wise, or yeah. So that is the first thing you can do. The second thing is that try to do motions which make you the most uncomfortable. Like I have seen in a lot of case preps, people like, oh, it's late at night, we don't want to do an econ motion, we'll have to think a lot, because people think they're not very easy. So honestly, case preps should be aligned towards thing that makes you the most uncomfortable, thing that is going to give you so much trouble that you won't be able to like be very chill in your case prep. You literally have to put in your thinking caps. That is the second advice I will give. The third advice is that if you can't think of anything, just flip a coin. Like that is the like let destiny choose for yourself. Sometimes it is best to not like give so much control to your own self. The last advice is that go and look at the tabs of one of the latest tournaments, because the latest tournaments generally have motions which are also quite relevant, and etc. So just do round one day, round two the other day, etc., etc. Yeah. So
Um,
there is
just
another question. Can you
just want
provide
to
with
add.
this? Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to add to that. I think one strategy which really works is to see if you're prepping for a tournament, see who is on cap, and then you take the cap members, and then you find out motions that they have set in previous tournaments. Again, there are multiple debates, like multiple websites like Hello Motions or debatedata.io, wherein you can see who was the cap at tournaments and what motion they set. So this just gives you an idea about what is the thinking perspective of that, say, debater. So for example, if you would have I don't know, if Matt Cato is like capping somewhere, and you are doing that tournament this weekend, you're prepping for that, then you can probably look for motions that of tournaments where Matt has scored, and then you can see if there's some pattern, or like if there's a repetition of, say, econ motion happening in every tournament Matt is scoring. That means that they likely are confident with that theme, and they're probably going to set a motion around that theme. So you can work around that, or the motion that they've previously set. So it's, you can think about like what is the thinking perspective of that cap as well. So this requires a little bit of research, but it's something which can help you get better, or like to figure out what kind of themes, like preemptively find out what kind of themes can be at a tournament, or you can expect.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a question about that. Will this be recorded? Yes, it is being recorded, and so you will get the
You will
link
get the
of this.
link of.
So yeah, no worries. Saksham.
Yeah, Lavanya, you said I just did a mock yesterday on the co-parenting motion, and I faced a difficulty because it was THP motion, and I faced a difficulty in communicating the idea of world building, what I thought would be to my PM, and I had to do that a bit again on deputy, and that kind of wasted my time to do the weighing. So you said that weighing is important from opening as well. Um, like, how would I be able to do that in that kind of a situation? And Robin, can you just explain the first point that again, the focus shouldn't be mechanism oriented? I didn't quite catch that.
Okay. So I think time management becomes really important within debates so that you're able to prioritize what matter is more important than the other matter. So let's just say that you have to rebuild the world that your PM talked about because there was lack of clarity there, or like you wanted to be more nuanced per se. So you should always make sure that you're not spending too much time in world building. Like you're not supposed to spend like 4 minutes or 5 minutes of your time just explaining what the world looks like. Try to keep those examples a little obvious, or like things that can be easily interpreted, or maybe come up with intuition pumps to the judges so that they can easily garner what are you talking about, what is the idea that you're looking at. But there should be uh there should be something which should like Wayne should always uh, have certain times that you are devoting in your speech. So it's very, very important to prove the relevance of your argument. So you have to make sure that you're spending at least like 30 seconds to 1 minute proving that. So all of that boils down to time management and prioritization of matter. But make it a thumb rule that you have to weigh arguments, because a lot of judges are probably going to give you a hard time if you don't weigh arguments. So that is something which becomes important. Robin.
All right. Yeah. Now the question was that focus shouldn't be mechanism oriented, rather claim oriented. Okay. So the difference is that in debating there is a claim, meaning there's an argument that we benefit the economy, we help minorities, we make people more happy on our side. This policy is better than that policy. And then there is analysis, that is mechanisms to support the larger claim to reach that impact. So when you're closing, I think that more focus should be on coming up with arguments rather than focus on analysis in the initial bit of your prep, like the first 8 to 10 minutes. Like I gave you an example about the stay at home trend. So if you think that okay, one of the harm of stay at home trend is economy, so don't start just making the economic argument, rather start thinking about other arguments also, because the opening can run all everything which you just think about, right? Because from closing it is always important for you to have a variety of things to run, because there's always the risk of opening running that. Yeah. So Rohan, I think, yeah. So I hope that answers that. Saksham. Rohan, I think you raised your hand.
I have questions. I'll take them after the once you're done.
Okay, okay, yeah. So yeah, Jidharth, you have a question?
Yeah, the in crux it is about how do you deal with judge variance during prep, because as you said, if you can't find an extension, just try to take a second. There was a to- tournament recently and the judge had said we weighed the same impacts and we weighed it better than the opening, but we're still derivative. But because you're using the same arguments, you can't weigh out and win against the other bench, other off bench. Um, to an extent, it might be about bad judging, but how do you deal with like variance in prep, because different judges judge with different metrics.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll answer this. So, if you are, Yadharth, if you are going for the same impact, right? So there are two things that you can do. So the first thing is, like we mentioned before, the idea about a missing link. So then what you argue is that, so meta commentary is very important. What do I mean by meta commentary? Meta commentary means to give statements which explain why you are winning. So it looks like, judge, uh, we agree that opening opposition reached this impact, but can this impact really be credited to them given that they don't prove this missing link? To prove this missing link was so important in this round, because if this missing link is not proven, it is very uncertain if we reach this impact or not. which means that this impact should be credited to us and not our opening. The second thing is that sometimes you reach the impact using different mechanisms, meaning different reasons to reach the same impact. Then you have to weigh why your reasons matter more than their reasons. So then you say, judge, yes, this impact is credited to opening opposition, but it will also be credited to closing opposition because we gave you different reasons from our opening. Except we also beat our opening because our reasons are more persuasive than opening of reasons. And then you explain why your reasons are more important than your opening reasons. Yeah. So I think meta commentary and literally saying these things out loud really helps.
If I can add a layer. So,
Go ahead.
in terms of variances of judges, that's obviously something every speaker will struggle with. I think in 90% of cases, you don't have to do anything and just call it a bad day. But I know what some smart speakers do is that they tailor their speeches to the judges. So, for example, if I know my judge is notorious for crediting extensions, I will make sure I explicitly have that meta commentary that Robin just talked about. I will spend an extra 30 seconds in my speech differentiating from opening to show that my impacts are not derivative within this debate. So you can use that information about the judge to tailor your case prep a bit, but if you overthink it, you might end up messing up your speech. So it's a delicate balance.
I mean,
Uh,
that's true. That really works out well because so you would have to be a little cognizant about figuring out what kind of feedback you have been getting from that judge, what is something that they prioritize. Because you're gonna find so many judges who have a pragmatic bias, who weigh pragmatic arguments more over principled arguments, and vice versa. So it becomes very important for you to figure that out. For example, in one of the tournament, some international judge judged us, and we ran a principled argument, and they did not credit it enough. Like they credited the pragmatic arguments much more heavily. So in the out round, when they were judging us again, and our OG ran like a full principled case, we knew that we can take an edge if we go more pragmatic heavy. So that's the strategy that we adopted. So figuring that out is also like really important for like what the judge really likes. I have two questions which are very, very similar and which I think are really crucial. So the question is about how do you deal with debate losses, especially when you are debating with your favorite teammates and you feel that you have let them down. And the second thing is, how do you deal with like continuous losses in your first year? And if that is like distressing, how do you justify the time that you have invested in debating? I think these two questions are very, very important. And we are going to cover about these things in the second half of our session as well. So I'm going to explicitly talk about those things in the second half. Um, yeah. So since we want to cover the second half first, we are moving towards that. And if any questions that's left, we'll take them at the end and we're going to answer all of those questions at the end. So that at least we have covered the matter that we wanted to present so far.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. Somebody in the chat wrote, "Is this meta weighing when we question the debate motion premise itself?" No, that's not the case. Meta commentary is just explaining why you are winning from your opening and like why you should be credited more. Like that's it. Yeah. So let's talk about the second part, and then at the end we'll have a dedicated time for questions. So don't worry, you can ask questions to us pertaining to the first part of our PPT and a session also. Yep. Let's begin now.
Okay. So I think the second part is more about the mental game and the mind game of that surrounds around debating. It's not any strategy based. It's very, very common things that we all of us know, but sometimes in the heat of the competitiveness and the heat of the moment, we probably overlook because there's so much rush of emotions, etc. Or like the way debating functions, or when you see that you're losing and you're not like the frustration of losing rounds and stuff like that. So those are a few things that you can probably keep in mind and should be kept in mind. Is that one, you should never lose your calm within debating rounds, because see, debating is not about losing one round or winning one round. It's a bigger picture than that. So one loss in a prelim doesn't doesn't warrant you to go like all crazy and be very aggressive towards your teammate, towards judges, towards other people. So hostility is never going to give you any benefit. It's about staying calm, figuring out what went wrong, talking up to judges, talking to your teammates what went wrong, and then trying to move forward constructively. So there are three thumb rules that should always be kept in mind within partner dynamics, because at the end of the day, debating is a sport, debating is a game. It's not defining your life, and the person that you're debating with is probably your friend, probably your senior, junior, college mate, and they are just another human beings. And it's okay if they make mistakes, because there are going to be good days and bad days for everybody. You're gonna give a bad speech someday, your partner is gonna save you, and it's going to be vice versa on the other days. So three things that should always kept in mind is, one is having some mutual respect towards the other person. The reason that you're teaming up with them is probably because either that you think that they have potential in debating, or they are your friend, or probably you look up to them and stuff like that. So that sense of respect should always be there towards them as a human being. And irrespective of what happens in debate, there's something which is like much bigger than that, that's outside the debate room, like, because your life is not determined by your debate room round, or like one round. Your worth is not determined by one round. So that respect should always be given towards your partner, because if you want respect, like if you want reciprocity in terms of respect, you have to give it to other people as well. The second thing is that you have to trust your partner. Don't be like too say don't be too controlling in debate rooms with, or like don't be too controlling in teams, because like burdening or like telling your debate partner what to do, what not to do, might just end up confusing them, because there's so much information that you are probably throwing at them, even if that's coming from a good intent. Even if you want them to just say out certain things, just trust them to a certain level. When they say that they have an extension, when they say that they are probably going to deal with the room, so having that trust is very, very important within debate rooms. Because see, debating is not about debating is not an individual sport, it's a team sport. So if the team doesn't perform well, then it's probably not like on a long term or on a consistent basis, you're probably not going to do better in the tournament. So that trust and respect is the groundwork for you to be able to sustain as a team. And third thing is toxicity. Toxicity is never going to lead you anywhere. The team is not going to work out if you are toxic. If you think that your teammate is not doing well, or if you think that certain things are not working for you, talk to them, advise them, and give them feedback. Give them constructive feedback of what is not working for you. What do you think should be improved a little better? And these things like become really important for speakers, especially because your teammate kind of determines how the case prep goes. And your performance is also contingent how the case prep is going. So probably you're teaming up with somebody who is new, and you just don't know their style of debating, and the case prep was very confusing, and you couldn't come up with a structured speech, and your speech went bad. So instead of going ahead and talking, say, instead of going ahead and instead of going ahead and say bitching about your partner, or going ahead and saying bad things about them, all of this is not going to improve the performance. The way that you can improve performance is going ahead and talking to them, telling them what can be a better strategy, if they should slow down a little bit in terms of case prep, if they should give you more time while for speed generation or for argumentation, or what is something which works best for you, is something which would enable the best out of the both of you. So communication becomes a really important way, and a constructive criticism and constructive feedback post every round, or whatever you think is uncomfortable for you within that case prep, becomes really, really important for you to be able to communicate to them, so that like things get better for you, and you are able to have a better synergy while debating.
Just one thing I'd like to add there in terms of life advice. I think what a lot of debaters forget is, since this is an extracurricular activity, it's also supposed to be fun. And it's not just about your actual improvement. It's that if you don't enjoy this as a sport, you will burn out fast. If you don't follow these thumb rules, you're much more likely to get frustrated with the debating circle, with the activity as a whole, and you won't be able to enjoy it to its maximum potential. So following these would just make your life a bit more better, even if you don't competitively improve.
All right. So now we will be focusing upon how to work on partner dynamics while you're within the debate room and while you're outside the debate room. So let's focus on while you're within the debate room. So the first thing to talk about is that don't be selfish. It's a team sport. Share matter. So this is a very basic thing. I really, really hope nobody thinks like this, that, oh, I have to give a better speech than my partner, so I won't be giving the best material to my partner. I mean, like, I get sometimes like you have the urge to be the finals best speaker, or like, or maybe to outspeak your partner, etc., etc. But trust me, the team only works well when you share. So if you are the third speaker or the second speaker and you have a great idea, it's always best to communicate that idea and have that matter come in your first speech only. So communication about that is very, very important, even if it comes at the cost of your speech. For example, there have been a lot of times wherein maybe I would have sacrificed myself getting a very good score by giving very good responses to the first speaker, because it was very important for that material to come in the first speech. So and that is something which you need to do even if you end up having lesser content. So like I remember like having like a page full of good content, like that I had to speak, but in the end I thought that this is very important and needs to come in the first speech, so I literally had to give my whole speech away as an added extension to the first speaker, and like told them that if you have time, do run this, and then I had to think about some other stuff. So this is very important. You have to share matter, you have to share the best of ideas. Okay, so the second thing is that you need to be open to ideas and you need to also be open to criticism. So when you're in a case prep, so it is always best to not be very fixated, to not be very fussy, because sometimes people have a superiority bias that we are the best, that we know it all, and it ends up happening that what the other person has to say is sometimes honestly really good. It's honestly something which you didn't think of. So sometimes it's always best to keep your ego aside and to just have your ears open and to just listen, be open to ideas, and also be open to criticism. And honestly speaking, this designated 15 minutes of time, you really, really need to be open to criticism and like generally not take things to your heart. The converse is also true, that you don't need to literally say that, oh, you're a dumb person, this argument is so stupid, why are you saying? There's a way to say things, but at the same time you need to realize that like time is limited and you just need to be very flexible in how you approach things. And this also really, really works with newer teammates also, because every person has a different style. So you will have some teammates who like to speak a lot and they literally don't give you any window to speak. You will have some teammates which are very quiet in nature and like want you to like speak more. There are some teammates which want you to go slower, even if it comes at the cost of you missing out on some content that you need to tell them. But maybe that is what works for them. So you need to find some sort of middle ground. You need to find some sort of things that are actually crucial and actually important. Yeah. Now focusing on within the debate room. So yeah, as I've explained, you need to be open to ideas. So if somebody says that, okay, I have an idea, so like actually try to just forget about all the ideas you have, and with an open mind just think, is this idea worth it? Because sometimes we are so obsessed with what we come up with ourselves, and we naturally believe ki because we have come up with this argument is the best, and we become very biased about it. This is a general human tendency. Like we always are biased about our own case, and we always think we are coming first irrespective of us coming fourth. So yeah, so really need to be unbiased in that approach. Yeah, so the third idea is that you need to be honest but in a respectful way. So sometimes, like, let's just say the round is very important, and what your teammate is saying, maybe you think that the on closing, you think that opening is obviously going to say this, so you don't need to waste your time on this. So you be honest, that like you tell your partner that, listen, let's not talk about this because opening is going to run this. Let's talk about other things, right? So you also know, you also don't need to just like make them waste time. So honesty is very important, and honesty goes both ways. So the first way where honesty goes is literally telling them that, bro, I really think this is not working and this argument is not very beneficial for us, but there is a way to do it. If you're going to tell them that, like, are you stupid, like, are you listening to yourself, I'm trust me, this is never going to work. This is never going to work because what will happen is that like they're not going to take the good stuff that you have also in a very positive way. So you won't be able to have like an effective case prep. Like to share a fun story. So this is on an ABP of 2021, and Lavanya and I, we were in our last prelim round. So we needed a first or a second to break. Otherwise, we were not going to break. And we were not able to come up with a case, and we literally started fighting. We literally started shouting on each other, Ki, ye, you're not able to understand this. And we were not able to do a case prep at all. Like, but we turned out to be lucky that somehow even after a lot of fighting we were able to do some of the case prep, and we managed to get a second hand break. But there have been a lot of instances where fighting just never works, so you need to be very respectful in your way of communication, and that is very very crucial. Yeah. So the other way honesty works is by literally telling your teammate कि bro समझ नहीं आ रहा. Just communicate that no, I am not able to understand something, because every person's language is different. Every person's ideation is different. Like there have been a lot of times wherein I sometimes understand the argument very well, but my teammate doesn't, and vice versa also. Sometimes I really don't get the point of an argument, and even when my partner explains it to me, so you need to be honest that I'm not able to get this. Can you dumb it down to can you please dumb it down, or can you tell me like what is the most important thing which I need to say, and maybe you expand it further in your second speech, in your deputy speech. So be honest in that way also. Like you don't have to prove it to your teammate that you're the best. It is honestly okay for you to not understand something, etc., etc. And honesty goes a long way, because the main goal is to get points. The main goal is to win. So if you're not honest, then it actually like ends up hurting you and your teammate in the round. So like in these both cases of honesty, you really really need to work on that. The fourth thing is only communicate the most important stuff when the debate has started. Sometimes too much feeding can be counterproductive. So by feeding I mean feeding of matter, feeding of responses, right? So what do I mean by this? So the idea is this: whenever there's an argument, every argument can have multitude of responses. Like, so if I think about three responses, maybe you think of three other responses, and we have an innate desire to communicate it to our teammates. Jaise ki the debate has started, and let's just say I'm the whip speaker. So my teammate wants me to do a lot of things. So my teammate keeps on telling me, do this, do that, do this, do that. So sometimes, if you're trying to feed a lot of things, if you're trying to tell 10 things to your partner because you can't talk a lot. Sometimes you talk via things like writing. Sometimes you talk in their ear because you can't be too loud. If there's an online comp, sometimes you try to type in a common Google document, or come up in a new different Gmeet, which sometimes is not very conducive because then you miss out on the debate. So the idea is that it is always best to communicate what is the most important thing, because if you end up telling 15 things to your partner, maybe the partner ends up getting so confused they're not able to do anything at all. So it's always best for you to trust them a little bit and know that the most important thing are these two responses. So give these two responses to your partner, and then tell them, do you want something else, because I have other things. And it's okay if they say no, because sometimes people are in a lot of stress and pressure, and maybe giving them more content is going to make them so confused that the existing content they have, they're not able to run that also. So not always communicate the most important stuff rather than every kind of stuff. The last thing is communicate prioritization of teams for responses. So like as Ravana explained in the beginning of the session, like sometimes you also need to communicate, like maybe you have to go for a strategic second. So also communicate that we really really need a second or we don't break. I think it's best we don't focus on opening government, because they're a solid team, they're probably getting a first. Let's because we are CO, let's do O wing and CG wing. Let's give more time to O and CG and less time to OG, because we need to prioritize. Sometimes this prioritization communication is important, because sometimes the other teammate is not able to see what really needs to be done. So strategy communication is sometimes more important than content communication, because people have an ability to come up with content themselves. So communicate the strategy, because debating is about strategy, and that is actually very important. Yep. So I think that covers the bit about the debate room. Lavanya, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you've covered almost everything.
Let's move on to the next slide. So now the next slide will cover outside the debate room. Okay, so what can you do outside the debate room? The first is constructive feedback. Now you give constructive feedback after every debate has ended. So always make a note of giving constructive feedback. So always tell them one or two good things that they did. Tell them the positive stuff. Tell them one or two bad things that they did also. Like, and also the way to communicate is that I think what you need to work upon is on this. I really loved the your case delivery. I really loved how you did the framing and all. But I think you need to work on responses. I think you spent a lot of time on responses, but except I think that a lot of responses were repetitive. So focus on not being too repetitive and try to concise your responses. So always give constructive feedback, and this goes both ways. Right. And do it in a very conducive manner. Give constructive feedback after your normal mocks, also after normal case prep sessions in practice, also, because that is very important. Because debating needs to be a curve. Like in every mock, in every tournament, there is something that you need to learn, and you can only learn with communication. Because oftentimes we are not able to see signs in ourselves that other people are able to see in us, and vice versa. We are able to see signs in other people, etc., etc. Like for example, a lot of times people have told me that sometimes I become too repetitive in responses. Like my fourth response and first response are sort of the same, but I could never see that. But because of effective communication, I like maybe a person can improve and try to concise and make them as one response only. Yeah. The second thing is that analyzing strengths and weakness of each other. So it's always good to analyze strengths and weaknesses to see that how this person is really solid in this and not solid in that, and then you can focus on these areas. So strengths and weaknesses are theme oriented. Like maybe sometimes a person can be really bad at international relations but really good at social movements, motions, or econ motions. And like it can also be like sometimes a person can be really good in things like delivering matter, but really bad at weighing. So always analyze and do self analyze and do your teammates analysis also, that what is the thing that they can work upon. So like if you're the first speaker, it's always best to write bits and speeches of your second speaker to actually point them but how they can improve, or to record yourself and revisit that later, because sometimes it's very difficult for second speaker to write the first speaker speech because you have to prepare your own speech. Yeah. Now, what to do with new teammates? Now, this is a little tricky because the idea is that if you have a teammate a lot of time, then you become so well versed and you have a lot of tuning. For example, Levin and I have teamed up so many times that sometimes in our prep, we are just going to be like, okay, let's like run this argument and run those reasons, because we have debated so much together. So we know what those reasons are. So we have that mutual trust. So like vice versa, Lavanya would tell me, so you can use like that part of weighing and like do that. And like so there's so much of tuning with like teammates that you have debated for so long. But with new teammates, there are three very important things that you need to focus on. The first is like the communication of strengths and weaknesses, which I just talked about. So you need to do this prior to a tournament. So if you plan to do a tournament with a new person for like which is like next week, so always tell them that I'm very bad at this, but I'm good at this, and be honest. So then they know what to expect and what not to expect. Because people also need to manage expectations, because sometimes people rely on one teammate for something. Like if somebody really does not know how to do feminist motions, you would rely on your teammates, and it is good to communicate it to them. Like, I'm really not good at this, so like if you can help me out with this. So that is something which is very important. The second is time needed for writing. So I have faced this a lot of times. Like whenever I've tried to team up with something new, there are some people who in their case prep just keep on discussing ideas and ideas and ideas, and that's it. Like they don't designate time to writing. Now every debater is different. Like like if I'm giving a first speech, or like maybe a DPM speech, so I generally have a lot of things written. Like I write my speeches like not letter by letter, but like I write claim, I read reason one, two, three. So there are some people who would just have like a page. I generally have 3 to 4 pages prepared. So like that is my style of debating. Every person has a different style of debating. There's no right style. It's very heterogeneous. So you need to tell to your teammate that I also need time for writing. So if you've discussed an idea, so give me 2 minutes. I'll quickly write these things, and then we move on to the second thing. Like because sometimes people are just going to give a speech by not looking the notes at all. But I do look at my notes. So like this is just one example of the potential problem which you can face with new teammates. So you need to communicate with them, etc. etc. The third thing is communicating case prep styles and meeting in the middle. Like there are different case prep styles. Sometimes people are like start like discussing right at the top. Sometimes people like to take 2 minutes, like take 2 minutes separate, like and then just write stuff, and then let's start talking after 2 minutes. I generally believe taking 1 or 2 minutes to ourselves is a better strategy. But again, this is very subjective. That is my personal belief. So you need to communicate a case prep style. I've had teammates who don't case prep with like what is the first argument we run. Who case prep like at the end of this debate, what is going to be the most important clash? And let's try to win that clash. So they use the reverse approach. They start from weighing. So they start that at the end of this debate, the biggest clash is going to be this. How will we weigh by our material is more important than their material? Sometimes people do the opposite. Start with the most obvious argument. Again, there are different strategies. So communicate what works for them, what works for you. Do some sort of practice sessions and then try to meet in the middle. Try to see what is working for you. If strategy A works for me, maybe strategy B will work for me with some other teammate. So with every teammate, there are different strategies, there are different sort of way to attune. So you really need to be flexible. You really need to be open because sometimes it can be a strategy which you don't have expertise in, but it can really end up doing wonders for you. So yeah, that part of communication, that part of being open, being flexible, and doing a lot of prep, doing a lot of analysis of strengths and weaknesses, and being honest is going to go a long way. And those are things which you do in outside the debate room. The last thing I want to talk about is how to deal with losses. So the first thing is that outside the debate room, the first thing is that Lavan has already covered that. Do realize that it is a sport and it's always not going to give you the best of results. Some have to go through a lot to get to the best of results. Like sometimes people don't break for like 6 7 tournaments, but they end up breaking at the next tournament. So any competitive activity will have their share of losses. So realistically speaking, you need to manage your expectation with that way also. Debating is hard, guys. It's not going to be just a rosy picture. Like there will be times when you feel so low, where you will be very angry at your partner, where you will be angry at yourself, where you will be like nothing is working out, where you'll be like I literally want to quit debating. But trust me, like the hard work really pays off. And one big victory is also able to outweigh a list of long cases of not breaking also. Like winning one comp after like not being able to get any sort of success after so long also feels so good that I personally believe it outweighs all the negative experiences also. And also do realize that in the end we're human beings and that there are things bigger than debating also. So even if your partner did a bad job and maybe you did not break, maybe you did not win because of your partner, and you truly feel that way, you need to have it within you to respect them, to forgive them, and to realize and to just not blame them. Because in the end, we have to be good human beings first before being good debaters, right? Because like there's no point of being a good debater if you're not a good human being. So we really need to be a good human being first. Otherwise, the space of debating really becomes a space which is not very good, wherein people don't feel like debating at all. So having a good community, having good people around you is what makes me want to debate like frequently, and that should be one of the reasons for you too. So yeah, that is what I needed to talk about. Lavanya, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to address the questions that there were earlier in the chat. The first bit about how do you like I think Robin covered about how do you deal with losses, but the second bit was about when you feel that you're debating with your favorite teammates and you let them down. So I think one thing is like don't be too harsh on yourself. because everybody has good days and bad days. Today, you probably did not deliver a good speech. The second day, you probably going to deliver the best speech of your life. So it's absolutely okay. Don't determine your worth out of one round, because debating is not like your performance is not based off one round. It's a journey. I mean, I share a personal experience. It's all about mindset. Like at Pro Am recently, I was like feeling very, very distressed because I thought that probably I'm doing not well. I am not debating enough. Like I'm not just being able to do it. Like it's just not working for me. And I'm just at my worst. I'm giving my worst speeches. But then I also thought about like the it's one step at a time. Even if this round went bad, I just have to look at how do I get better the next round? How am I able to identify what is not working for me and how I can improve it? And I mean, even if in that tournament I gave 5 bad speeches and just one good speech in finals, all of that outweighed it, right? So one good speech can outweigh any sort of bad speeches that you gave. So there going to be time wherein you choke in out rounds, wherein you don't like deliver a good speech in out rounds. It's absolutely okay, because it's just one tournament, probably going to get better at the next one. And that mutual trust, communication, all of that can sometimes enable your partner drag you to the victory. And it's also fine if your partner is dragging you to through the victory line, because there are going to be days when they are down and you are probably doing better than them and you are like outspeaking them. So it's all a journey, and it's all like the mindset that you have at large. I mean, so Robin and I started debating in 2021, and we had like series of semi-finalists. We had series of finals losses. It took us so long to be able to win a tournament, even when we knew that we are probably winning certain tournaments, but we did not get the votes or like stuff like that. But we just didn't give up on debating, because we felt that debating is much more than the result that we are getting. We just enjoy the process so much. We enjoy meeting people like from all across the country, from so much different backgrounds, different universities, people all across. And it's such an escape, because you get to debate, you get to talk about so many trivial issues, so many different things, and you get to communicate, articulate things better. You get to have fun with your friends after tournament, post rounds, and all of that is like so much more valuable, that even if I lost one round or like lost one tournament, that's absolutely okay, because the memories that I made was so much bigger than that, or like I'm going to cherish that forever. And like most of you are going to be in college. For me, like since I'm working right now, I try to come back to debating almost every weekend, because I feel that the real world is so bad and boring and mundane that you need the adrenaline rush that you get after every round. And you're going to miss this so much, the student community and everything, and you should like really really value that. So that's one thing. uh
Sorry to interrupt. By the way, Lavanya ended up winning Pro Am after not doing good in a lot of rounds, but ended up
uh
winning.
and the second question was, how do you cope with continuous losses, and um and how do you improve in a manner that justifies the time that you have put into debating? So the way that I look at debating is that one aspect is of your trajectory within like debating in general, how well you are doing with that. But I think that debating has a concurrent benefit or impact on your real life as well, in terms of hard skill and soft skill development. So I think that people who have been very very active debaters, or who debate in general, are people who are able to get so much better with respect to their communication skills, with respect to articulating things better, with respect to probably like analytically thinking better. So even if probably you're not winning debates, you are developing those skills simultaneously by virtue of how debating functions, or like parliamentary debating functions, because it puts you through stress rounds. It makes you unable to deal with stressful situations and all of that. The second thing is you get to network with so many people. And I think in my first year of college, every SOC that wanted us to join them said one thing: college is nothing but about networking. You should network about with people. They never explained how do you network with people. I mean, if you are in some other SOC, you're probably gonna go to competitions and meet competitors. but you never get to build a relationship on a personal level. So that networking never functions, that networking never pans out. You get to make genuine friends here, but you also get to personally connect with people, and you don't know how like who can be helpful to you in what way in the future. Probably they're gonna help you with your job interviews, or probably they're gonna help you with, say, some college application, or maybe they are some they turn out to be some of your senior in your job, or etc. So that relationship or that community that debating has within India, given that it's so closely knit, is also like a very, very big benefit that you get out of it. I mean, not to say this, but you can probably get referrals out of these connections and these networks as well, because so many debaters are working at such great places. So the reason that they have been able to get through those interviews or get at that level is also because like debating helps you. I mean, I don't know how many people are here who would want to get into consulting, but I'll tell you that consulting is nothing but debating. It's literally the same thing. Whatever that you do in your case prep and analyzing stuff, this literally the same thing that you do in consulting. So the skill set that you develop here is obviously going to be useful in your jobs and in whatever that you do in the future as well. So there's a big, big benefit that you get from debating in isolation, irrespective of the result that you're probably going to get out of it. There's a question about how do you deal with rounds when both of you are finding difficulty in matter generation. I think this is a question that we addressed like previously as well, in terms of if matter generation is like you're not able to come up with matter, then as closing teams, you can potentially identify loopholes that are in the opening team, use their arguments to probably think along different lines, or go for rebuttals, because rebuttals are also a legitimate extension. So those are a few things of approach that you can probably follow.
Yeah. Also, just wanted to mention that officially that is the end of our session. We hope that you were able to learn something from this. So now we can move on to feedback time and also question time. We're not ending the session right now. If you have any questions, feel free. But I was thinking we can do feedback time before that, Rohan.
Yeah, hey everyone, please fill out the feedback form. I see 40 people here. We will not start Q&A until I see at least 8 responses. It's only a 2-minute form. We can finish it off quickly. This feedback is important for all future sessions.
Yeah, Rohan, should we move for questions right now? Should we wait a bit?
Just let's wait for 2 minutes.
Cool.
It's like for 8 responses. It will be specific. But maybe you want to go back to the previous slide. I think we can talk a bit more about this. Especially I think with new teammates, I think I had a couple of ideas to add. I think one, it is obviously good to communicate your strengths and your weaknesses, but at the same time, it's very difficult to capture these. Like Robin mentioned, people are not very self-aware when it comes to debating because of obvious cognitive biases. Therefore, it's also good for you to understand how a person case preps and how a person debates. So whenever you're with a new teammate, it's important to obviously get a few spars in. I think even if you don't have the time to do spars, I think having 3 or 4 case preps with someone else at minimum is very important before going to a competition, because it gives you an idea of one, not only how do they think about things and therefore what's the best way to explain it to them, but second, what is the best way to communicate with them, or like how they communicate with you. I think establishing a rapport on both sides in terms of communication methods, something Robin also talked about, is incredibly important to be able to go ahead and create change, or like to be able to go ahead and create meaningful understanding barriers with one another. So, like Robin talked about having shortcuts with Lavanya in terms of arguments where they already know what they're going to run. I think establishing these small gimmicks in terms of shortcuts would really speed up your prep and really speed up your understanding with one another. So, the way Chinmaya and I do this, for example, is sometimes when because we are relatively new as teammates, we either have a tendency to over explain or under explain our points because we're not sure if the other person's getting it. So we have we have an agreement within ourselves. If either one of us is over explaining, we tell them shut up and they shut up immediately, because we have the trust that the other person understands everything I said already without me needing to explain more. Obviously, if we've done multiple tournaments together, it becomes much more easier. I'd already know to what extent I need to explain an idea to them. But on a shorter term, having these sort of understandings with each other, having this level of honesty with each other, help us streamline case prep more. So coming up with these small things or quick fixes with your teammates in case prep, which allow you to, or like yeah, just that allow you to streamline your case prep. So I think that's one very important idea.
Yeah. Rohan, are we good to go with the Q&A bit?
Yes, I see 15 responses. That's a lot. Thanks, everyone.
Uh, cool. Yeah, so we have covered a lot of questions before also, but if you have any more questions, feel free to shoot. You can just unmute yourself. That would be easier than just typing everything out. But if that works for you, that's fine as well.
It's regarding the responses one. So if you can't fit an extension, but also mostly the opening team also was able to give sufficient response, how new and how like exclusive can you give responses that can help you to like not come like fourth?
So the question is, how do you give unique responses which are not completely which opening has already given? Okay. So
Yeah,
there are two ways to go about it. The first way is to think of new responses, right? If you can. I mean, we also have to admit that sometimes we just have a limitation, meaning we just can't think of anything new. So one way to think about is to try to tackle the argument from different kind of lenses. So if opening of response to opening gov is something along the lines of that that this is very ineffective because it is going to be badly implemented, maybe think of a response from another line that maybe you don't have the sufficient funds to do so, or maybe things like even if it is implemented well, maybe people don't internalize it very well. So maybe let's just say like government has some sort of policy, etc., etc. So opening ops response to OG's response to opening up is that the problem with this is that you're not going to implement this policy well. So like you're giving some sort of a response. So on closing, think of it from different kind of lenses. Like as I explained, another lens could be maybe something on people's perceiving it. So as Lavanya talked about the stakeholder chain, so similarly see problems with it from different kind of lenses. So that is one way to come up with new responses. Now second, let's talk about if you can't come up with new responses at all, the problem is then what you can do is just weigh why your extension matters more than their case in and of itself. And I think that is a very good thing about BP, is that even if you give zero responses, you can still win on weighing alone. Like it's always the best, it's always best to respond and then to weigh, but always think about why your case just beats their case, even if you're not directly proving that their case is wrong. So that is the second way to go about it. Lavanya, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the third way to go about it is to always take a higher burden, because I think while responding and rebutting, we have a mitigatory bias in terms like, what do I mean by that? So the first way that you would think while responding is to probably mitigate the argument or try to flip that argument. So mitigation is always like the first way that rebuttals are approached. So if your opening has approached the rebuttal in a mitigatory way, wherein they try to mitigate the argument or flip the argument, go and take a higher burden and say that even if their argument is true, why is it comparatively better or like far worse off? Which also integrates the weighing bit, but it also means that it's easier for you to weigh the weighing by saying that you are taking a higher burden than your opening teams. Thus, you become comparatively better with the way that you respond with that argument or deal with that argument. So that's one way to go about it.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question. If you have any
Yes,
other
yes,
question.
yes.
Okay, so there's this question: as beginners, how can we work upon knowing more and more topics and dimensions within before tournaments in order to come up with the content during actual case prep? So I think the one thing that is the best thing about parliamentary debate is about how much it works on, say, logic and less on spec. So even if you give examples, that examples are not going to be the thing that would make you win or lose debates, because there can be multitude of examples to prove either side of the things, and debate is more about logic. So the more case preps that you do with your teammates, the more that you are able to come up with that logic. But also, second, you do mocks with people from different socks, with people of your college, to be able to implement that case prep into speeches and convert them into speeches and to be able to respond to different speeches. The third thing is always to watch more and more debate videos. When you watch debate videos, you probably understand how certain arguments can be run, what can be different analysis that can be used to run certain things, and they're going, and you'd realize there are so many arguments that can be copy pasted into different sorts of motions as well. So if there's a motion about, say, feminism, a lot of arguments can be copied from one motion to another motion as well, because there are certain common principles that you are debating on, like common themes. So the more debate videos that you watch of great debaters, you would understand how to run arguments that's there. And yes, as Rohan mentioned, you can obviously check out the session by Rohan and Sai.
All right, let's move to the next question. How do you communicate? Just a second. Yeah. How do you communicate with your teammate when other speakers are giving their speeches, and how do you handle communication online? So yeah, this is difficult, but the only thing you can do in an offline comp is just write something. Like there can't be a lot of cross talk, a little bit sure, but like a little bit bits and pieces. But like all you can do is have a piece of paper and write the most important bit. Like there are obviously limitations, like you can't fully talk like in like quiet lens. And with respect to in an online comp, the first strategy is to like maybe have a WhatsApp chat ongoing where you can communicate. Or what some people do is, right when the speaker ends his speech, they have a separate Google Meet wherein they can verbally communicate with each other. So these are the two possible strategies. One is via chat, the other is having a separate G Meet. The third is in an online comp, if the two of you can sit together, that really helps. Yep, these three possible things. Let's go to the next question. What to do when an argument becomes an absolute wash, when let's say CO comes and we are CG, or a strategy to not let it become like that. Okay, so the first way to do that, if you're closing government and CO comes up with an argument and it's probably washing out everything, so the first thing to do is that on whip you need to explain that why it is not a wash, i.e. why your mechanisms or why your argument is more effective than CO's version of the argument. That is the first thing. And the second bit is to just respond respond to whatever they say, and rebuild on the response that they have given to you. The third bit is to just preempt it. Like oftentimes you know what the responses are going to be, so you preempt it. Like say now op might say this, but no, this is ineffective because our claim is stronger, etc, etc. So preempt it. On whip, give reasons why your reasons matter more than their reasons. And like thirdly, just rebuild on it. Lavanya, do you have anything to add?
No, I think so that
Yep.
you. Um,
Cool. Any other questions? I think Mehak wrote, I have a question too.
Hi, I just want to clarify I'm not Mehak. I'm using someone else's account and I
Oh,
have two questions actually. The first question is, can you tell me about a little about effective weighing considering, especially when you have three teams to compare as closing?
Hey, I'm
um,
so sorry, I'll interrupt there. Can you take this one at the end because it's not very specific to this section? We'll
Okay,
also
I'll
have
just ask
future
my
session.
second question then that I think it is more
sure.
specific.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so as Lavanya had said that as closing you should take higher burdens. So as opening and in general in debating, should you take higher burdens or smaller burdens? Because if you take higher burdens, then closing can fill the mechanization, and if you take smaller burdens, then closing can take bigger burdens.
Okay, so I think like burdens can be in two ways. One is like higher burden doesn't mean that you have to like take big burdens which are difficult to prove, i.e., you don't have to say that this motion is going to end poverty or this motion is going to make the world like very, very good or it's going to end racism, because that's a higher burden also within debating, because it's very difficult to prove that you can reach there. I mean, if like you could think of a potential way to reach it in like 15 minutes, the world would have been solved by now because so many people have been thinking about it. So you don't have to think along those lines in terms of higher burden. It's about while responding. So you can, it's always better to give layered responses, i.e., to give multiple responses to an argument. So when you're responding to, say, some argument of opening opposition, you say that why is this argument not true in terms of normal rebuttals, and then you can take like a higher burden and say that even if it were to be true, why is it still just not justified? That is an even if argument, that whatever they say, even if that's true, why is their best case still better than our worst case kind of thing. So that's just another way of responding to an argument which can always be incorporated within the multiple responses that you give.
Yeah, I think Lavanya covers everything. I just want to add one small thing. I personally believe take the most realistic burden that you can fulfill.
Yeah,
Any other question?
this
Yeah.
just in just a summarization of the same answer. I think debating is a constant activity to take the biggest burden you can fulfill. So sure, sometimes if you take a small burden, another person might take a big burden, but then try to prove why their burden is unfulfilled, or challenge them on why your burden is still most relevant and completing. So finding that balance in the medium burden is, I think, what you should aim for. And you shouldn't overthink about bigger or smaller burdens.
Any other questions?
Um, a very small one. I think you've probably already covered this, but what is the main strategy if let's say you see there's a motion and you say ki isme there is closing ka hai in case, and that's the first instinct you get ki there is no way this is in PP motion or something like that, or you think that my opening team is so good they'll just take everything away, because a lot of time that happens with us. There's a very good opening. If they don't take the extension away, they just frame out so much that whatever we give will be derivative at that point in time. So, what is the strategy to think of extensions in prep? And because obviously you have to cut out 3, 4 sheets or 3, 4 points in every mock or every round. But what is the strategy to go with it? How do you come up with something this good?
Okay, so the first thing to do is that when you're in case prep and you feel that there is no depth in this, meaning there is no closing on this. So the first thing to do is that maybe it would be difficult for you to come up with new arguments, and then maybe go for vertical is a better strategy. Try to think of small links which opening might miss, like this part we have covered. The second thing what you can do is try to think of a lot of ancillary impacts that this argument can have. Look, so sometimes what you can do is broaden the spectrum and come up with more impact that would be generated on society, maybe in very long term or maybe in the shortest of terms, etc., etc. And maybe it would be difficult for you to out your opening, and like maybe then you can go for a second with that. And third is that sometimes if you really think that there is nothing left for you, then simply go for a strategic second and go heavy on responses, and like just take your opposite bench out. So these are the three realistic things that I think that you can do if honestly there is no case you think that is genuinely left on closing. Yeah, Lavanya.
Because like just to give a TLDR on this, I think uh like there's a bias that we have in terms of that extension. It just means horizontal extension, i.e., coming with a newer case line. But there are multiple things that are credited as genuine extensions within PPs. One is vertical extension, i.e., you're just giving different reasons to prove the same thing that opening has already talked about. Then you have to prove why your reasons are better and more persuasive than your opening. The second is rebuttal extension. You can, like, rebuttals can always be a genuine means of extension. That is the new contribution that you have given. And third is weighing extension that also exists in terms of the way that you weigh arguments. and the weighing that you probably use to prove why that case is more relevant than the thing, and why that weighing becomes an important thing within this debate, is also like a genuine thing that can be credited as extension. So just don't think along the line that I have to come up with a newer case line only to be able to beat a certain team. You can think along the other three ways also for you, like your content to be credited as extensions.
Are there any other questions? So I'll quickly take that one question which earlier someone asked about how to weigh so many things. So the first is that you really need to prioritize what teams are very important in this round that you really need to win against. So focus more of weighing on those teams effectively. Yeah, and the third thing is that generally like you need to allocate, like if you're going for a first, you need to allocate time to all teams basically. And like if a team did really bad, maybe you can just respond to their claim and maybe you don't need to weigh out them, but focus more on weighing on the teams which are quite close or in contention. So that is how you have to think strategically how to prioritize your time with respect to weighing. Yeah.
A small follow-up on like
Yep.
this question, not very relevant to this session, but in general, if you have to weigh things, what is the better strategy to go bench by bench and weigh with everyone? Or if you're CEO to you just take the government as a whole, because a lot of times the responses to weighings is fairly like same for both the benches. So it just you just repeating yourself if you go bench by bench.
So I'll say it depends, honestly, case by case. If you think the government bench has a very similar impact, but they have different mechanisms to reach their impact, then you simply say that this impact does not matter, which both gov benches talked about. So you can simply take them on or like together. But if it is very distinct, then maybe not just better, but the right thing to do is to do it separate. So it honestly varies from debate to debate. Yeah.
Hey, I have two questions as well from the form, and I think I resonate with both of these questions quite well. One is, how do you have creativity in case prep, which is more specifically, sometimes you miss out on stakeholders completely because you're too, tunnel visioned on a particular set of stakeholders you think the debate is initially about. So how do you combat that?
Lavanya, do you want to take this one or should I?
Go ahead.
Okay, so how do you be very creative? So, in my experience, what I have seen is that to be creative is for you to take a step back, because the point is that if you have debated for a while, you sort of know what the basic arguments are going to be. So, when you really want to go for creativity, you really need to like not think about the most obvious arguments, the most stock case, but really think about key what all can really happen with this case. Like sometimes creativity can also be used to come up with counterfactuals in regrets motions, or also creativity can come up with respect to identifying a stakeholder, or uh, maybe coming up with some sort of creative impacts also. So I think one thing that you mentioned in the starting, which Lavanya talked about, the idea about realism, I think that really helps for you to actually be creative. So like realistically think how would like this generally be pan out, etc. So like one example which I can give is that like debutant tournament just happened, which like I was capping and I was judging grand finals, no sorry, not judging, spectating grand finals. So the motion was something about that we would prefer to live in a world where every kid is assigned a profession right at their birth, and that they would be moderately successful at their profession because they are talented in that, we have the technology, right? So like so op team talked about something and I was discussing with my friends, is that this is such a creative thing, and it sort of seems like what a closing opposition would argue. Like the most obvious opening of argument is that no, it is bad for you to assign a profession to a child in the childbirth, because now because you can't opt out from that profession. The obvious argument is that you don't have choice to choose the life you want to live, you don't have choice to choose the profession you want to have. What if you're assigned the profession of being a finance person, but you really enjoy dancing and you want to be a dance coach? You can't do that in this world, in this motion. So like CEO talked about that so there are some professions which are very risky, like that of like being in the army, or maybe that of somebody who has to take a lot of risks, like maybe somebody in the circus. So the point is that when you talk about really risky professions, people can literally die even if they're very talented people in the thing which they do best can also die, like that of army in case of war, or maybe stuntsmen in doing a lot of stunts for movies. The point is that nobody should be assigned a profession in which the likelihood of death is so high which they're not willing to do. So this was a very niche thing, right? So I think the way to approach creativity is to really think how will the world change, how will people adapt to this in the next 6 months, how will people adapt to this in the next 6 years or in the next 10 years, what will be the changes in everyday life of people, will it change your relationship with friends, will it change your perception about life. So just thinking about different kind of weird random things really boosts your creativity. That is what I think helps. Levan, if you want to add something.
Okay, I think just one thing that can also help in general is that sometimes we get like when we are prepping also, when we are mocking also, we debate so many like hard theme motions, like policy motions or like very common themes that we sometimes don't debate on, like these weird motions like on this house would press the button, or there's some different technology, or motions which are very philosophical. So I think those things, that's why a lot of people find difficulty in approaching them as well, because the approach becomes a little different than what how would you approach an IR finance econ motion. So while case prepping also, while like mocking also, you should also sometimes like debate on motions which are a little too random, like black mirror motions or philosophical motions as well, so that you have a practice of trying to think of like thinking out of the box on things which are probably not so common and which are like hypothetical per se.
Yeah, that's good advice because these motions really uh, get your creativity juices to flow.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. The second question was, how much of prep time should you allocate towards coming up with ideas, and how much of it should you allocate coming up with mechanisms?
So I would say this honestly depends on team to team. So the first thing to say, ideally, I would say that uh, if you are opening, so come up with ideas in like 3, 4-ish minutes, 5 minutes, and like that is what we follow, and then start analyzing and making those arguments because you need to fill in the gaps and not leave anything for closing. And like if you're closing, then allocate about maybe 8 to 10 minutes to ideas and then go for analysis, etc. And also it also varies. If you are well versed with the mechanization of a particular idea, then you don't need a lot of time for that, and then you can prioritize based on motion, based on your teammate also. So those are very generic things that I gave you, but this will be very subjective, um, based on round, based on teammate, based on motion. Yep.
Yeah, that's everything from my side. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's time that we end this. I don't think there are any questions now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again, everyone, for showing up, and please do fill the feedback form. It will be attached to the link tree as well. And thank you so much, Robin and Lavanya, for being here. Goodbye.
Sure, happy to help. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the session. Bye, guys.